Hi, everybody. Okay, let's begin. Where we left off last week and we're going now is that the punishment is now beginning. King HaNavi, Nathan the prophet, came at the word of God and told David that he's going to be punished for the Bat Sheva incident. And step one is the death of the baby that Bat Sheva got pregnant with. And we learned that David was on the floor praying and fasting and crying and praying and refusing to eat, fasting. And the baby died anyway after 7 days. And when his people told him, or when he figured out, he saw that his advisors would not talk to him. They didn't want to tell him there was something going on. They were talking to each other, but they were not telling him. And he inferred that that meant the baby had died. And he got up and he ate and he cleaned himself, he shaved. And we learned, they asked him why you were so falling to pieces when the baby was dying. And now you hear the baby's dead and you're suddenly up and eating. And he explained that as long as the baby was alive, there was that possibility that the baby might survive if he prayed enough. And now God has done what God has done. The baby's dead. Story over. He'll always mourn the baby. He'll always regret that the baby died. And so will Bat Sheva. It's going to be, for the rest of their lives, that's going to be part of their lifetime memories. But it's time to go on with life. And we left off with that. And I wanted to go, and I started Gemara, but we didn't have enough time, so we'll continue now. Two very important principles in Judaism. Number one is the principle that we never stop praying, no matter how bad it looks. There can always be a miracle. Usually not. That's why it's called a miracle. If miracles were that easy to generate, they wouldn't be miracles. If all you have to do is pray a certain amount of prayer and then everything will be nice, well, that's not a miracle. That's a formula that always works. And it does not always work. In fact, usually does not result in the way that one hopes. But there can always be a miracle. And we believe that. It's very much part of what we believe. And there's two components of it. Number one, and that's the one we're learning now in the Gemara. We ran out of time last week, so continuing. The idea that we never give up because we believe in miracles. Again, we cannot really fairly get upset and disappointed if we don't get our miracle, because that's what miracles are. They usually don't happen, but sometimes they do, as rare as they be, and we don't know. And we have to learn also how to look at miracles, because we have a lot of miracles that happen in our lives and we don't notice them because they're not quite as impressive as the miracle we were looking for. I believe it was a miracle that I got a few extra years with Ellen. She had glioblastoma, and it comes with a time frame. And the doctor told us what to expect. And we got 2 extra years. And you all have perhaps heard of situations of people who are told by their doctors that you have X amount of time to go, and they outlive the expectation. Sometimes they live less than the expectation, but sometimes they outlive the expectation. We don't know why things happen. And do we know how to accept the miracle? How to look at something and say, well, that was a miracle, because the following extra things happened in those 2 years that we would not have had otherwise. Do we know how to say that? Do we know that because one of us did not get run over by a car this week, that God actually did a miracle because it was supposed to happen? And maybe one of us was praying, or maybe someone else was praying, or maybe we did a good deed, or maybe someone else did a mitzvah. And so the car did not run us over. We'll never know. The near car accident, everybody has. If you drive enough, everybody can think of situations where some moron on the road and somehow you got away from, and you have to shoot left to avoid hitting him, but that put you into oncoming traffic for 2 seconds. But thank God nobody was there at that moment in oncoming traffic. So you didn't get killed. That's a miracle. But we don't even think of those as a miracle. That's just, wow, good luck. We have so many miracles we don't know that we just take for granted. The miracle that how I met how I met Denise, how I met Ellen, were kind of like natural. If someone would say, how did you meet? It's kind of a natural story. It's not as though there was a car accident and somebody got out of the car to help that person and ended up getting married. It was more natural. Somebody introduced me to Ellen, someone who knew the two of us. It was Denise was a member of our shul. It kind of follows a natural course. But if I were to tell you the backstories, which I won't, of Denise's story of how she ended up in our shul, or how it came to pass that Ellen was where she was and I was where I was at the time, for both of us to know that same person who introduced us. And it was a miracle. It really is a miracle. And it's not just it's all of us. We have miracles. We just have to train ourselves to recognize miracles. And then it's easier to believe in miracles because you begin to realize that you've actually had miracles, financial miracles. You're applying for a job, you can't get one. And then through a crazy confluence of circumstances, you end up getting a miracle. You get a job. Let's pick that up. You end up getting a job that you never would have expected. I could tell you, we don't have time for it, and it's too narcissistic if I only talk about myself. But I could tell you at least 3 jobs in my career that came about through absolutely miracles. In fact, our class and the whole Young Israel of Orange County came about because of some very evil people in a previous institution where I was that made that particular position untenable. We'll leave it at that. And then the question became for Ellen and me, now what? And the circumstances that rapidly unfolded became the most amazing stuff in my life. I'm happier now than I ever have been before. I mean, I'd like to have, a little bit better health and like to have both wives. But I'm incredibly happy. And it stemmed from some bad stuff. We all have it. It's not just about me. If it were only about me, I wouldn't go into it because it would really be too narcissistic. But I'm a rabbi. People tell me their private stories. Everybody's got incredible miracle stories. And we just don't think about it because a sea did not split. Or someone who absolutely was not going to survive from an illness did not end up surviving. So we walk around, well, who knows if we have miracles? We have miracles. And sometimes a miracle is 1 extra year or 5 extra years. Sometimes a miracle is just so much. And people you love, if it didn't happen to you, maybe it happened to someone you love. And you hear about it. And you just, there are 2 or 3 things I described to Denise that unfolded in the 4 years I've known Denise. But really, those were things that best had to be shared with Ellen, Zichron Livracha, because Ellen and I had gone through something over 10 to 15 years of aggravation. And from out of nowhere, but she had passed away, everything turned out right. Something that we had so much, you've gone through this. You have so much aggravation, whatever, a job that you hated and a person you hated or they hated you, and you took another job and you weren't even happy with that job. And then a few years later, it turns out that the job that aggravated you went bankrupt. And 50 of their employees now are desperately looking for work, but you had left them already and already established yourself at your new job. And you're doing great. In fact, one of the people that lost his or her job at the old place when it went bankrupt just called you whether you would hire them. And wouldn't you like to be able to share that with someone who was with you during the bad times? And these things happen all the time because I talk to people, they tell me, and nobody wants to go into the details in public. They don't want to tell you they got fired. They just want, but they'll tell the rabbi, I got fired. And rabbi will ask a few years later, so what ended up happening? And then they tell, well, you'll never believe this, rabbi. And I totally believe it. I totally believe it. I wouldn't have believed it if you didn't have something to tell me that I would never believe. And that's the miracles. And it's such an important thing for us as believing Jews to learn and teach ourselves how to see miracles. And you don't even have to force yourself to look at small things and call them miracles. Well, Rabbi Fischer said, I have miracles. And I just have to learn how to find them. So let's see. I did a scratcher and I made $5. And I guess I'm going to tell Rabbi Fischer I got my miracle. I'm not talking about the $5. I'm talking about real miracles. Well, like what I just described. You get fired from a job. They're making fun of you. And then 10 years later, they're begging you to hire them. And if you're a good Jew, you don't take revenge. And you don't even stuff it in their faces. But it's a miracle. You go home and you tell your closest friend and your closest, confidant. Let me tell you how it all ended up. And there are going to be people that get out of those universities, Jews, coming out of Columbia and Harvard and all these anti-Semitic places. They're going to be out in a few years and they're going to look back and they're going to find that it made men and women out of them and proud Jews. And it turned them around. And we're all going to look back in a few years and we're going to find that with all the assimilation on campus and Jews running away from their heritage and rushing to assimilate, and we're going to find that all these Jews that got rejected on their efforts to assimilate, we're going to find out they ended up pretty proud and that they're more comfortable in their own skin. So it might be money and it might be health. One of the things that interests me so much, and then we'll get to the text, are the people who come to me and say, Rabbi, can you recite a prayer for my this person or that person? And I actually have a lot of problem with that because I'm honest. If I weren't honest, I wouldn't even say this, but I am honest. When someone is ill, when someone needs, the person who needs to pray primarily are the people who know that person, because that prayer is coming from their hearts. When Miriam got leprosy, biblical leprosy, Tzarat, Moshe Rabbeinu, her brother, prayed for him. For her. Now, of course, he was also the rabbi. He was so holy that you would go to him anyway. But the power of his prayer was that it was his sister more than anything else. That's why the Torah tells us about that one. You don't have the Torah telling us that he prayed for this one and he prayed for that one. He either prayed for Am Yisrael, for the whole nation, or his sister. And that's the prayer you make. People come to the rabbi, can you pray for this person? Rabbi doesn't know the person. Rabbi's reading the words out of a book. I mean, the words have meaning or the rabbi would not recite them, but you try to be honest with the people and tell them really, I'll tell you the page number in the Art Scroll Siddur. You need to recite this prayer. And they don't. They leave it to the rabbi to recite. You have to learn how to pray. You have to know how to pray, or at least to have a book from which to pray. And the rabbi will pray as well. And often, person dies anyway. And then the interesting thing is, I'll ask a person, so how did I'll use the word brother because I don't have a brother, so I'm not putting any iron heart on my brother. Never had a brother. All my children are girls. All my siblings are girls. All my wives are girls. And all my wives, their siblings are girls. And their children are girls. So, but I read the news and I think I understand what a brother is. So to use a brother as an example, I recited the prayer for the brother, and the brother had no chance. Well, the doctors basically were looking down on the floor when they were asked by the family. So then we recited Mishberach, gave tzedakah, He asked 2, 3 weeks later, so what became of your brother? Oh, my brother's out of the hospital. He's great. And there's absolutely no perception whatsoever of thank God that God did a miracle for me. They expected the brother to die. They came with a begging for a prayer. The rabbi said, you should recite the prayer. No, Rabbi, you recite it. The brother comes out alive 3 weeks later, cancer remission from no one can understand how it happened, or this or that, and absolutely no perception whatsoever that God and the prayer and the miracle had anything to do with anything. I wonder how God feels about it. Maybe he doesn't mind. Maybe he figures, I know my children. I know my children. I know the other people. I'm used to it. I don't know how God reacts. But it's important for us, when we get a miracle, to turn right around and to thank God again and to pray a prayer of thanks. Just you had a prayer of Mishaberach Verchola, to come back with a Berchat HaGomel, to say a prayer. Thank you, God, for sparing me. And by the way, not only you who asked the rabbi to recite the prayer for the sick person ought to be going to shul every day for the rest of his and her life. They don't. They have their miracle, and then they're back in business. They don't come to shul. Maybe they come Rosh Hashanah. Maybe they come Yom Kippur. And there's no change. They have had the rabbis watching. The rabbi's still trying to figure it out. I can't believe that we prayed for him. That's amazing. He had no chance. I spoke to the doctor, and the doctor said, you could pray all you like. He's got no chance. 3 weeks later, out of the hospital. And nobody's thanking God. I'd like you to just think about that as we get into this Gemara. Because the Gemara is taking us from the story of how David was praying and praying, and the child did not survive. Because sometimes that was the punishment, and it was irrevocable. And yet look at the next child that he had. King Solomon. It's not bad. Imagine having King Solomon for your son. So there's a lot of good stuff. But sometimes it doesn't change. And here's the story. To refresh your memory from where we left off last time. Let's go here. And let's go here. So, okay, we'll go back to that later after that. So we had been learning that David was begging God on behalf of that baby. The baby came out, not a fetus. The baby lasted 1 week. Oh, another halacha to teach you. And we'll come right back to that. Another halacha. So the question becomes, how can he, let's say, be sitting and crying and practically sitting Shiva when the baby dies? Like, what's going on with that? So, and then when the baby comes out okay, he gets up, he eats, and he does not sit Shiva. So what's that all about? So for time reasons and other, I just want to highlight a little piece that's in there to pick up. The first 30 days of the baby's life are a sort of gray zone. We don't know what to make of that. And if a baby dies right after birth, we do not sit Shiva, because the baby's not deemed to have been fully stable alive. And so Shiva kicks in like at the 30th day, God forbid, if it even, God forbid. But this comes up, God forbid, a child is born. Let's not even put it on Jews. King Henry VIII had a couple of kids, a few kids born who died in the first week. And then and a few of them made it past the week, but died within the month. And the way Henry VIII dealt with it is he would chop off the wife's head and try again. But one has to make it 30 days to be considered that they were alive. And tragically, sometimes we see in a Jewish cemetery, as in a non-Jewish cemetery, let's say during periods of the yellow fever, when there was the plague and in the Spanish fever in the 1910s, or the yellow fever at the time of the American Revolution Philadelphia. That's one of the reasons they moved the capital from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. They moved out of Philadelphia partly because of the scourge of the yellow fever, and people were dropping like flies. And that's the story. That's the backstory in the musical 1776, why they had the window closed. And then John Adams opens the window, and then they sing, "Sit down, John," and open the window. Well, somebody open up the window and sit down, John. Part of it is they had the windows closed because of the yellow fever. So even though it was like 100 degrees all over Philadelphia, July 4th, right? It's July. They had the windows closed because of the scourge of the disease. So here, David has a baby that doesn't make it, and so he's not going to sit Shiva. So we have that. So Vayvekesh David et Elokim baranar, Vayatzam David som, he fasted, Va velon v'shachav arza, he slept on the ground, he did not go to his bed, and then the word got out that the baby died, he figured it out. Seventh day the child died, David's servants were afraid to tell him. We spoke to him, for they said we spoke to him when the kid was alive, and he wouldn't listen to us. How can we tell him now the kid's dead? He might do something terrible, like suicidal. So David saw servants were whispering, and he was able to figure out, uh-oh, baby dead, yes. And then he got up, bathed. You're not supposed to bathe during Shiva. Anointed himself, not supposed to anoint yourself during Shiva. Changed his clothes. God forbid, I hope none of you has ever had to sit Shiva, but like when my father died, or Ellen was Nifter, you wear that, you tear every garment you're wearing during Shiva has to be torn. Not only at the cemetery does the rabbi help the mourner tear his or her garment, but throughout Shiva week, any garment the person is wearing during Shiva week needs to be torn. So for even practical reasons, not you, but a person wears the same garment. So the person doesn't have to go around tearing a whole wardrobe. So here he's changing his garment. Well, what about Shiva? And he's bathing. And what about Shiva? I just explained. Shiva did not come into play because the baby did not live long enough. And then he prayed to God, ate food. And everybody asked him, now you bounced to life, but you didn't before. And he said, before I felt, who knows, maybe God will have pity on me, the baby will live. But now that he's dead, what's the point in fasting anymore? Okay, he's never going to come back anyway. And then it says, David comforted his wife Bat Sheva. They are married by now. He was physically intimate with her. And she became pregnant from that. And the baby was Shlomo. So that furthermore comments on what I just said to you. During Shiva, a person sitting Shiva is not allowed to have physical intimacy with the spouse. It is permitted during Shloshim. There's the intense, severe mourning of the first 7 days. There's significant mourning, but not severe, intense, that extends another 23 days of Shloshim for a 30-day first month. For example, a man does not shave for the first 30 days if he's sitting Shiva. It's not only the first 7, but other of the rules no longer apply after the first 7 days. But here he's having physical intimacy with his wife within the first 7 days of the baby's death. So how could that be if he's sitting Shiva? Because he's not sitting Shiva, because the baby did not live long enough. And God loved the new baby, Shlomo, who gets named Shlomo, partly Shalom. May his birth bring peace. May he also be Shalem, complete. And so on and so forth. And text tells us that God named the baby Jedediah, Yedidiah. But we don't really see much reference to Shlomo as Yedidiah. We know him as Shlomo. And the rest of the chapter is very quick, and I'm not even going to do it yet, if at all. I want to get into chapter 13 next. And maybe we'll get to it tonight. So I was teaching you this Gemara. So just to refresh your memories without going into all the biblical text I brought last time. The prophet, for every biblical king, God had a biblical prophet to keep them under control, to keep them honest. to balance them. So the biblical king was the head of government, and the biblical prophet of the generation was God's messenger of conscience. Because the king was an autocrat, really, really an autocrat who has complete control, even could have people executed. We've learned that many times, simply by whim, not to mention if he had a just reason. So there was kind of no control other than God handing down a punishment, like what happened to David after the Bat Sheva incident. So it seems that every king, God sent a Navi, a prophet, during that same time. Not that they lived at the exact same minute. Maybe a Navi died while the king still was alive. So the Navi's successor rose and took up where the previous Navi left off. Or maybe the Navi was still alive and the king died. And when the new king was named, that same Navi was handed over to the new king. And it also seems fascinating, getting back to the opening of tonight's class, a miracle. God always seems to have sent just the right Navi for just the right king. The more evil and strong the king, the more powerful and righteous the Navi. The weaker the king, or the less bad, the softer the Navi. A righteous king had a more easygoing Navi. It's always the right person. It's like God blessed. People don't see a God thing. People study this politics. God blessed the United States of America by giving the people Abraham Lincoln at the moment of the crucible. Everyone takes away, oh boy, we lucky. Oh, we lucky we had Abraham Lincoln and not Millard Fillmore. The only reason people don't say it is they don't know enough history to know there was a guy named Millard Fillmore. What a break. People don't even know that Lincoln became president by accident. At that Republican convention, to name the nominee to run for president in 1860, it was not like today where everybody knows in advance of the convention who won the primaries. They didn't have primaries that way. So you went to an open convention and the leading candidates were known. And at the convention floor, they tried to win over delegates. And often they were able to win over enough delegates that at the first vote, a guy would win, end of story. But every so often, nobody would get the majority at the first vote, so they would have a second round. There was some conventions they went on. Franklin Roosevelt, it took several days before Roosevelt got the Democrat nomination in 1932. One has to say that's the hand of God. And I'm not even saying that it was good that we got Roosevelt. It may have been a curse, but that's how it is. In the case of Lincoln, another guy, not Lincoln, I believe it was William Seward, had the votes. The first vote was that night that they all gathered, and he had the votes. And there was a screw up at the printing company, and they did not get the ballots over to the convention in time for the vote. So they postponed the balloting till the next morning. And Lincoln's people spent all night, 12 hours, hocking everybody at Chinik. So did the others. And the vote changed overnight. And in the end, Lincoln won on the third or fourth, whatever ballot. But that was a miracle. But that was a miracle from God, to have the right person at the right time. So at the time of the evil king Ahab, we had Elijah, Yeshaya HaNavi. He prophesied in the northern kingdom. He did not prophesy in the southern kingdom. We think of Yeshaya HaNavi. Eliyahu the Navi was Elijah the prophet. He's like the prophet of the Jews. He was only the prophet of the northern kingdom. And since the northern kingdom disappeared, as we learned the other day, the 10 lost tribes, so, or as we will be learning, we learned it last Thursday. So the people whom Eliyahu prophesied, they're all gone. But here we're learning about the southern kingdom, a righteous king, Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah. And in his time was the righteous Navi, Isaiah, Yeshaya. And as we learned last week, there was just one little matter of protocol that was kind of screwed up. Everything was fine. Righteous king, righteous prophet, righteous nation. At that moment, they had no problems. They were going to have problems soon. But at that point, no problems. But the problem was the king and the prophet never met each other. That's kind of weird. And we learned last week, so I'm not going to read from the Pesukim, but just to refresh your memory, it was a matter of protocol. The king believed it is not on me to go and introduce myself to the Navi at his house. The proper thing is for the Navi to come to the palace and introduce himself to me. And indeed, Eliyahu, up north, historically before, had introduced himself to King Achav. Didn't introduce him, God had sent him to King Achav to give him a dressing down. But Eliyahu approached Achav. And then on the other hand, the Navi Isaiah, not out of arrogance or narcissism, that's the magic word of the night, not out of narcissism or arrogance, but he felt it's inappropriate for the messenger of God to belittle himself by going to meet and introduce himself to Basar Vadam, a human being made of flesh and blood. It is more appropriate for the king to come and introduce himself to the Navi. And the Gemara tells us that God brings answers, solves problems, and brings compromises where people could not compromise. Wouldn't we like that in the Middle East? And so what did God do? God struck King Chizkiyahu, the righteous, with a mortal disease that was going to kill him right away. And then God said to Isaiah, you got to go to the king and wish him, B'dikas Bikar Cholim, you got to go and wish him well and say a Mishaberach for him. And you have to go and visit the sick. It's a mitzvah. It's a Torah mitzvah. And you're the prophet. You've got to do it. And then you're a role model for the rest of the nation. And everybody will know they should do it. Or at least stand outside the palace. Can't have 20,000 people walking into his room. But a nation needs to go and do Bikar Cholim. And so Isaiah goes to him. And God says, when you go, bring him this message. He's going to die. He's going to die in a few days. Let him know what's what. And he can prepare himself and tie up his final arrangements. And so Isaiah goes. And it's a very difficult experience, you could imagine. Introducing yourself to the king of the nation to whom you never have introduced yourself. And you finally come to say, he's going to die in 2 days. That's what it is. And this brings us to exactly the text I want to teach you, which is wrapping together everything I've done in my introduction tonight. And if we have time, we'll go more beyond. Of course, we'll go more. Here we go. So Rav Hamnuna said, first he's interpreting a verse, and we did that last week, so I'll go quick. This particular verse that could have two meanings, the word pesher. The word pesher can have more than one meaning. More properly, in the context of where it is, the word pesher would mean who knows the interpretation, who can discern, who can interpret. But technically, it has the same Hebrew root as peshara, which is compromise. So, Mika Kadosh Baruch Hu sheyodeh la'asot peshara ben shnei tzadikim. Who is like God, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, Kadosh, Baruch, blessed, who, he, the Holy One, blessed is he, who is like God, sheyodeh, who knows, la'asot, to do, peshara, a compromise, between, shnei, two, tzadikim. Who is like God, who can bring a compromise between two righteous people? Ben Chizkiyahu Yeshayahu, between Hezekiah and Isaiah. You see, Chizkiyahu Amar, let Yeshaya Gabai. Chizkiyahu was always saying, let Yeshaya come to me. Because we have a precedent with Elijah, where the king was Achav, and Elijah, the prophet, introduced himself to the king. But Yeshaya said, let Chizkiyahu Gabai. Isaiah the prophet said, really, King Hezekiah should come to me. Because when King Achav eventually died, he was succeeded by his son, Yoram. And when Eliyahu did not exactly die, but he went to heaven, He was succeeded by Elisha. So then you had King Yoram and King Elisha, slow down, and Elisha. And in that case, the king went to introduce himself to the prophet. Okay. Ma asa Kadosh Baruch Hu. So what did God do? What did God asa do? Hevi Isurim al Chizkiyahu. He brought travails, horrible, deathly illness on Hezekiah. The Amarlo Lishayahu. And then he said to Isaiah, Lech, go, walk, uvaker et achola, and visit the sick person. Shneimar, and that's what it says. That's the text that we learned last week. We learned last week in the text, in Isaiah 38:1, in those days Hezekiah fell dangerously ill. The prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, came and said to him, thus says God, set your affairs in order, for you're going to die. You will not get well. Lo tichya. Thereupon Hezekiah turned his face to the wall, prayed to God, please God, remember how I've walked before you sincerely and wholeheartedly, and have done what is pleasing to you. I've been a righteous king. And he's not bragging. It's that's part of his prayer. And Hezekiah wept profusely. He didn't only pray with words, but with bechi, with crying. And the word of God came to Isaiah, who had transmitted the message and then left the palace. Go back and tell Hezekiah, this is God, the God of your forefather David. I've heard your prayer. I've seen your tears. So I'm going to add 15 more years to your life. Wow. And I will also rescue you and the city from the hands of the king of Assyria. I will protect that city, which is another story I look forward someday to teaching you. But for now, we'll stick with the 15 years. What is 15 years? Let's see, it's now 2025. So just ask yourself, 2010, all the things that have happened in your life between 2010 and 2025. All the things that 15 years is a lot of life. 15 years, my God. Who was the president in 2010? It was Obama had just been elected. The New York Jets had not gotten into the finals in the Football League. Today, Trump is president. Jets still haven't gotten into the finals of the Football League. But 15 years of your life, look what's happened in 15 years. That's a tremendous amount. And so God said, I'll give you 15 more years of life. So as it says, so this seems redundant. And Gemara first says, while we're studying this, we like to study each and every single word, as you have learned with me in our Navi class. It seems redundant. What is the meaning of you will die and you will not live? It means you'll die in this world, you'll not live in the world to come. Wow. So whatever it is this tzaddik did, this righteous person did, it seems that he was being told he's going to die on his deathbed and not have a place in the world to come. Chizkiyahu said, what is this all about? My kuli hai, ma kol zeh. What is all this? What's it all about? And Isaiah said, because you did not marry and engage in procreation. Whoa. So I started explaining it last week for the benefit of those not married, for the benefit of those not having procreated, and for the rest of us to know the law. And I went into it somewhat, so I don't want to go overlapping. You can always find the previous class on YouTube if you weren't here, and usually you are here. It is a positive mitzvah. Just to refresh your memory again, we're doing it the short version. It is a positive mitzvah on Jewish men to procreate. Jewish men must do their part to give birth. The mitzvah does not fall on women. Women obviously are necessary for procreation, but it is not they who are commanded to do it. If a woman would actively prevent her husband from procreating, I mean, like, for that purpose, then it is her sin. And if he's doing everything he can and she's doing everything she can to sabotage it without him knowing it, that's her sin, not his sin. This is God stuff. We're not God. We don't sit analyzing who's right and who's wrong. We're just talking in general terms. The man needs to do what he needs to do to procreate, and the woman does not need to. Therefore, in this situation, as we learned last week, if the man, in consulting with his rabbi, if it determined that at this moment it is not incumbent on you to procreate and birth control may be used, it is the woman who does the birth control, not the man. So the man does not use it. I don't like to be gross or blatant, but the man does not use a condom, let's say. The woman uses one of the various tools of birth control. If the rabbi has said in that couple situation that birth control would be allowed. And as I've said, since 98%, 99% of Orthodox households, truly honest Orthodox households, are not running around with 8, 9, 10, 11 kids, you can connect whatever dots you want to connect. It's not our business to start guessing or to look into the next one's home. It's none of our business. But I'm just saying, as a general rule, you can assume that there are situations when rabbis, at one point or another, give a family the word that, and you can also assume that, all things being equal, if a family is ready to go for 8, 9, 10, 11 kids, that's a big, big, big mitzvah. That's what it's all about. Okay, we continue with this. So you're supposed to have children. You're supposed to have a lot of children. At the very least, most halachic understandings are, needs to be at least one male and one female, at least one boy and one girl. That the rabbi has greater leniency to rule. And as I taught you also last week, it's not that the rabbi is saying, the rabbi said we don't have to have any more kids. Well, the rabbi is saying we do. The rabbi is saying, according to my Torah learning that I received during the course of my education and continue to pursue, and my studies in how to interpret and apply Torah law, I can tell you that God is saying, his laws say this. The rabbi is not saying, well, I'm giving you permission not to have more kids. And then you go home, the rabbi gave me permission. The rabbi properly is saying, God's laws do not now require you to have another child at this time or ever or whatever. So anyway, if the rabbi gives that, hands down that understanding, and family has it, so the woman does the birth control. And there's supposed to be at least one boy and one girl. But what if you run into, no joke, what if you run into Tevye? A situation like Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof. My first father-in-law had exactly that situation. 5 girls, no boys. In my case, I had 3 girls, no boys. So what do? There is such a thing, a rabbi will tell you that you've had 5 children, you haven't had a boy. This is your financial situation. This is your home situation. And circumstances being what they are, blah, 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 blah. In my case, having had 3 girls, we tried again. And the 4th one, we had a boy. Loved them all equally. With the boy, we now had 1 boy, 1 girl plus, and that impacted my rabbi's analysis of what to do next. So those are some of those rules. But you're supposed to try to have children. Now, let's say you cannot have children. You're married, and you turn out, whether the male's sperm or the woman's eggs or whatever, you can't have children. According to Jewish law, there is no obligation to start in vitro fertilization and surrogate. If a person cannot have children, they cannot have children. Now, if they want to have children, go ahead, Gesundheit Hayden. Again, it's got to be consulted with a rabbi. What can you do? What can't you do? And those are also questions. And like, what happens with in vitro is easier, and surrogacy that opens. And what if the surrogate is a non-Jewish woman? And if the rabbi tells that, according to Jewish law, surrogacy would be permitted, but it's a non-Jewish woman, will that child be a Jew? Will that child be a non-Jew? And just all kinds of stuff. It could be a 20-week course, really, and it is. But for our purposes right now, just get a ballpark idea. A person's supposed to get married, and a person's supposed to have kids. Now, what if they don't get married? And that also. The question is a person philosophically of the mind, I refuse to get married because there are too many children being born in India and in Malaysia, and I will not be part of this pressure on population growth. ZPG, zero population growth, and global warming, however that ties it. So that's forbidden. A Jew is forbidden to have that mindset. The notion that I'm ideologically opposed to having kids, or my brother had kids, or my sister had kids, and they were no good, and I don't want to do that. Or I have a great, and I don't want to get married. Or I know this one got married, and that ruined their lives, and I don't want to get married. That is forbidden. That's not allowed. But there's the other circumstance where a lot of people, for any of a number of reasons, end up not get married. Let's say they actually went out with someone for 10 years, and the person, threw them off, wasted their time. We'll get married, and then the person turns out to be a heel or whatever it is, and a lowlife, or even a good person who chickens out, I don't know. And now this other person waited 10 years, 15 years, and the climate is different now. There are so many factors. Person ends up with an illness. There are so many factors. So it never, ever devolves on you individually to judge anyone else or yourself, or at most, talk to a rabbi privately. And don't worry about other people. Assume everybody is doing the right thing. That's really a very good lifestyle to have. Not to look at other people and judge them. Assume if they don't have kids, or if this one's not married, there's a good reason. And as a rabbi of 40 plus years who has been privy to so many private cases, I'll tell you, there's almost always a very good reason, or even several good reasons. But I wanted to cover this because this is what this Gemara is about. And the Gemara, the purpose of the Gemara is you never give up praying. But in order to know the Gemara, you got to know it's not a perfect fit with a David HaMelech having a baby who's dying. This Gemara is a little bit different, but it's the same principles, and it is the perfect match Gemara. It is the landmark Gemara for this particular concept of never stop praying. Okay. So Chizkiyahu says, what is all it? Why is he going to die? He's like the most righteous king of Israel, or technically of Judah. Israel is the northern kingdom, most righteous kingdom of the Jewish people since David. And as a descendant of David, or he wouldn't even have the throne of the southern kingdom. That tells you immediately he was better than Solomon. He's better than his father Achaz. My kuliyai, what is this? Isaiah said, because you did not marry and engage in procreation. You decided to stay a single guy. You're the king of Israel, and you decided to stay single and not have kids. So God has decided to take your life prematurely. Whoa. So Chizkiyahu explains, this you need to know. Chizkiyahu will get married. This sort of is, now that it's been explained to him this way, he's going to get married, and he's going to have a son. And the son's name is going to be Menashe, who will grow up to be the most evil king in the history of the Jewish people. And he will reign for 55 years. And he will drive the Jewish people from the righteousness that his father Chizkiyahu had inspired a nation to live by, and will, over 55 years' time, destroy the Jewish people. Whether you love Obama or hate Obama, he was transformative. Whether you love or hate, to keep it balanced, not political, whether you love or hate Ronald Reagan, he was transformative. As a result of Reagan, America's values and political outlook changed. I was a college kid in those years. America changed. And over time, politics is cyclical, and things changed. George Bush the first, that'll get political. He ruined Reagan's transformation. Okay. And then Obama, maybe you love what Obama did, but he was transformative. And only 8 years. He changed so much. And I don't want to get into it because it's political. I want to focus on the Gemara. So we see that all it takes is 8 years for a Reagan or an Obama to transform 300 million people. Not everybody. 45% of the people always land on the other side. But he transformed, not only did he transform the politics, he transformed the culture. Okay. Imagine King Menashe, 55 years. That's 7 times as long as Obama or Reagan had. 7 times. And he destroyed them. In fact, God, in Malachim Bet, 2 Kings, ultimately says, because of what Menashe did to the Jewish nation, and because the Jewish nation went along with it, I will exile you from Jerusalem and from the land. The northern kingdom, those 10 tribes, they got exiled for their reasons. And you, the southern kingdom, that's the last straw. The 55 years of Menashe, the last straw. I will exile you all. The temple will be destroyed. Because Menashe just died and a righteous king just came in, I won't execute the punishment this minute. Not while the righteous king Josiah, Yoshia, is in king. But after he's gone, out. Okay. So now that I've told you that, more pieces will fit together. So Isaiah said, you're going to die prematurely because you did not marry and you did not engage in procreation. Chizkiyahu replies, he apologizes, and said, I had no children because I had divine inspiration. I had prophecy. God gave me prophecy that the children who would emerge from me will be evil. Chizkiyahu meant that he had seen that he was going to be procreating Menashe. And that would lead to the destruction of the nation. He was acting righteously. He didn't ask a rabbi. They didn't have rabbis in those days. He didn't ask the Navi. He didn't even meet the Navi. He had a prophecy that he's going to be giving birth to, with his wife, the most evil king in Jewish history. He made a sacrifice as a righteous man to go childless, which meant because they did not have the effective birth controls that they have today, it meant not marrying. So it was a sacrifice. It was meant as a righteous sacrifice. And now Isaiah comes to tell him that God says that cost you 15 years of your life. Isaiah said, why do you involve yourself with the secrets of God? The things that God has his world and his plans, and it is not your job to intervene with God's program, with his plans. That which you've been commanded, the mitzvah of procreation, you are required to perform, and that which is acceptable in the eyes of the Holy One, blessed be he will perform. My demifakadada, that which was mifakdat, that which was commanded to you, mifakdat, ibilach lamabit, you have to do. And that which is fine with God, le'avid, he'll do. So Chizkiyahu said, okay, if I'm going to have to give birth based on the prophecy that I, the king, have had, that this is the worst guy that ever was born, and I tried to avoid it, let's try plan B. Either I'm the most righteous guy alive today, King Chizkiyahu, or I guess you're the most righteous guy alive today, Isaiah the prophet. So give me your daughter. I mean, let's stack the odds. The child born to the most righteous man and most righteous woman of the generation, that's got to, now give me your daughter as my wife. Perhaps my merit and your merit will cause virtuous children to emerge. And Isaiah said, okay, The decree has already been decreed against you. The only problem is you're dead. No point in my giving you my daughter to marry. It's a good plan B, but you're dead. The decree has been sent by heaven. Heaven sent me to you to let you know, and you're dead. This judgment cannot be changed. Chizkiyahu said to Isaiah, son of Amoz, which is a synonym. His father's name is Amoz, so you can call him Isaiah. It's like calling him by his last name, Amison. Son of Amoz, why don't you stop prophesying now and leave? Ooh, how do you say that? Amarle ben Amoz, kalei nevuatcha, stop your nevuah, your prophecy. Yeah, it's pretty strong wording. But say, get out of here. Get out. You didn't quite say get out of here, but it's pretty strong. Get out. You did your job. Leave. I guess that's the most respectful way if you want to try to say it in English in a way that's short of get out of here. I guess you've done your job. Now leave. Okay. Yeah, that's how they put it. Good translation. As long as the prophet spoke as God's emissary, Chizkiyahu was obligated to listen to him. Can't stop him from talking and prophesying when he's delivering. Okay. However, he wasn't obligated, Isaiah. He wasn't sent to interpret whether there's any way to retract the decree. His assignment was to report that the decree has been handed down, and here's the decree. But he was not assigned to state that the decree is irrevocable. Had he said that Isaiah said, and God further commanded me to say, this is irrevocable, that would be different. But he didn't say that. He simply said, Kevar nigzera lecha gzera, a decree has been decreed against you. Okay? Chizkiyahu continues, Kach mekublani mi beit avi abba. I have a family tradition from my grandfather, from the house of the father of my father, referring to King David. What have we learned about King David? That even with God having decreed that baby was going to die, David never stopped praying until it was done. But until that moment, he never stopped. This is our family tradition. And for that matter, it's now the tradition of all Jews. Afilu cherev chadam unachat al tzavaro shel adam, even if a sharp knife is placed on the neck of a person by the enemy about to kill him, al yimna atzmo min arachamim, one still should not hesitate to continue seeking mercy. You still pray, even if a crusader in the 1100s or Muhammad's Muslim herds in the 600s has a knife to the throat. You never, October 7th, you never stop praying. And our Sunday class, we have learned, not literally knife on the throat, we have learned in Sunday class over the last several months, I have brought to you several miracles. And those of you who have been at Sunday class may remember, for example, there was the Orthodox kibbutz whose gates were closed on Shabbat, and the Arabs couldn't get through the gate. There was the Orthodox lady who went away every Shabbat to keep Shabbat, so from the non-religious kibbutz, and she'd go with her husband, who was not Orthodox but went with her. And so when the Arabs came, they weren't there. There was the Orthodox woman who went away every Shabbat with her non-religious husband, but that Shabbat she was sick. So they stayed at the kibbutz, and as the Arabs were going down, killing the people room by room by room, they just skipped her room because one of those Arabs was their housekeeper, and like so many innocent Gaza civilians, is actually a murderer with Hamas. And he came and reported to Hamas, full notes on every person in that kibbutz, and had reported, don't go into that room because they're never around on Saturdays. So even though she was, they didn't want to waste time. So that was a miracle. And my favorite miracle, that old, elderly lady in her 80s or 90s, the Argentinian lady, and the Arab goes into her place with his knife, his sword, and he's about to kill her, and he just asks her something, or she says something like, "Don't kill me," and she says it in Spanish, whatever dialect they use in Argentina, and the Arab says, "What language?" And she's trying to explain to the Arab just before he kills her that it's the language of Argentina, the language of Messi, Messi, the internationally famous soccer player. And the Arab says, what do you have to do with Messi? And she says, Messi is from Argentina like me. And the Arab looks at this 90-year-old woman and says, you from Messi? I can't kill you. And he gives his sword or his gun or his rifle to the woman. And he stands and he makes a selfie, takes a selfie of himself with the 90-year-old woman holding the rifle. And then he goes on to the next room and resumes killing people. Even when the sword is on your throat, you never know. Miracles happen. Literally, we have witnessed in our class, miracles happen. So here, Chizkiyahu is saying we have a family tradition from Zaidi, Grandpa David. You don't stop praying. You never know. One may still hold out hope that the prayers will be answered. And with regard to the fact that one should not despair of God's mercy, Gemara cites, it was also said that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Eliezer both said it became an expression, it's a Talmudic expression. Even if a sharp sword is resting on a person's neck, he should never prevent himself from praying for a miracle. The pasuk says in Job, though he slay me, I will trust in him. We continue. So we're going to skip this. All right. He talks about Joseph. Remember Joseph? They threw Joseph in the pit, and there's no food, no water, and he's got no hope. Next thing you know, he's the viceroy of Egypt. You never know. You never know. Well, having heard Isaiah's harsh prophecy, immediately Chizkiyahu turned his face to the wall and prayed. We just learned that. We just learned that in 38:2. Thereupon Chizkiyahu turned his face to the wall and prayed. Vayasef Chizkiyahu panav l'kir, v'atpalel l'Hashem. So go back. I'm giving him 15 more years. That will give him time to marry Isaiah's daughter, have the son, and bring the son to like a bar mitzvah. I don't know that it's about bar mitzvah. Yeah, bar mitzvah. 13, not a catered American bar mitzvah, but he'll be 13, old enough to be a man and able to do mitzvah. And he'll have that. And from this we learn why David, this principle of David still praying, and it's a principle for all of us, that no matter what it is, no matter in our own lives, or people we love, or situations, we never stop praying. And sometimes our prayers make a difference to that degree. And sometimes our individual prayer might not be enough, but the whole nation. And that's when you'll see an entire nation go and pray. You'll get an email or an announcement in shul that there will be a massive recital of Tehillim, either at shul or on the internet or at the kotel. Very famously, when the Arabs and their sympathizers took hostages in Tevye, there was a very, very famous prayer vigil at the kotel. The kotel plaza was jam-packed with people, religious, non-religious, reciting prayers in Tehillim. And you remember what happened in Tevye, the miracle of Tevye. And there were just miracles. I don't know how this one's going to work out with Trump. I don't know what's going to happen on Saturday. I don't know whether they're going to give everybody up or they're not going to give. If they don't give everybody up, I don't know whether I don't know whether there's going to be all hell to pay. I don't know how it's all going to shake out. I don't know what's going to end up happening, whether Gaza is going to be emptied out. We're going to have to just wait and find out. But these are miraculous times. It's just stuff that something's going on. That's just miraculous. Anybody religious who cannot see that the timing is extraordinary, that just at this moment that you have a guy talking about two-state solution the way he is, and clearing out Gaza, and I want them all out by Saturday or else. This is not just politics, because there's no president I'm not even saying he's a good president. There's no presidents don't do that. Reagan didn't even do that. Reagan walked in and the Ayatollah gave up the people. But nobody does this. And the idea that a madman became president just now, at this moment, and that besides doing all of his madman stuff, with all the other stuff he's doing, that he also is doing it for Gaza. I know rabbis who would say all the other stuff is only because of Gaza. HaKadosh Baruch Hu set things up this way only for the Jews of Gaza and for the Jews of Judea, Samaria. And it would be I'm not qualified to make that blanket a statement, but I'm not qualified to say they're wrong. That Tafka specifically, to have a madman who spends 3 weeks as a madman, again, whatever your politics is, I'm gonna tariff you. All right, I won't. I'll tariff you. I'm going to tariff you 25%, 50%. I'm going to tariff you. I'm cutting off all the money everywhere. I'm bringing in Robert Kennedy as the Secretary of Health. I mean, he's a madman, and maybe the whole idea. I definitely know of rabbis who believe right now that it's all because of Gaza and Judea, Samaria, and to convince the Arabs. Don't start up with him. You've had 3 weeks to watch. This guy is a madman, and you don't know what he's going to do. But miracles happen. Now, will it turn out to be a good miracle or a bad miracle? It's too early to tell. I get very nervous when people start to prophesy without authority from God. But it's something for us to understand. And when you have a relative who has a miracle recovery, you have to say thank you to God. And you have to pray, and you have to bench Gomel. They should bench Gomel. It's special prayer that is recited when one survives a great danger or travels through the expanse of a humongous desert or travels across an ocean. A few kinds of things, or 4 things that are listed as the examples. And we have this here with David. As we go into chapter 13, which is where we'll start next week in Yirtzeh Hashem. Vayi achrei chen, ul'Avshalom ben David achot yafa, u'shma Tamar, vaye'ahaveha Amnon ben David. Now, this happened sometime afterwards. Not like the day after the baby died, but a little bit afterwards, maybe a year afterward, maybe 2 years afterward. David had a son, Avshalom, and we learned that in 2 Kings chapter 3. And he was born to one of David's wives. And David had another son named Amnon. Avshalom ben David, Amnon ben David. And Amnon was born to another of David's wives. The wife who gave birth to Avshalom also gave birth to Tamar. And she was gorgeous. Achot yafa. So one of the 6 or 8 wives gave birth to Avshalom and his sister Tamar, and another wife gave birth to Amnon. So Amnon was half brother to Tamar, and Amnon became infatuated with her. And you can start to guess that this is not going to lead to something good. So that will be next week. It's not going to be a good story. You know it's coming, and it's coming. I want to thank everybody for being here with us. I look forward to seeing some of you on Thursday, Sunday, certainly next week. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel and to give us a like and send along the link to other people. And let's say some prayers. Let's say some prayers that whatever happens this Saturday by 12 noon is for the good of the Jewish people.